of... Yes, now we're being recorded. I was just going to say before we start that at 2 p.m, Matt Sillers will be here to announce the winners of the photography competition. So we've had the Edge photo competition. We've now got some winners, so Matt will join us at 2 o'clock to announce those. That'll be fun. Okay, it's over to you, Charlotte.
Hi everyone, we're really delighted to welcome you all here today, and it's really heartening to see over 100 of you here and all interested in social art practices in a rural and coastal context. And today you'll hear from myself and my colleagues Amy Dunnachie in Jura, Fiona Rennie and Louise Kernaghan in Fort William. And we're all socially engaged practitioners working across the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. And as Ravi said, we all met on UHI's MA Art and Social Practice course, which is an online course run out of Shetland College. And it's led by Roxanne Permar and Sharon Carden, who we'd just really like to thank for all their help and support in developing this panel discussion today. We've only got an hour, so we're going to aim to speak for about 40 minutes, so about 5 to 10 minutes each, and then we'll allow for at least 15-20 minutes for discussion and questions at the end, because we'd love to hear from you all. And so I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. Okay. Can everybody see that? Excellent.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to start with a couple of definitions. Here's some definitions from the Tate website, which we find quite useful. But what is socially engaged arts practice or social practice? It's sometimes referred to as collaborative or participatory art, but hopefully through the 3 case studies that you'll see here, you'll see that we kind of make our own definition for what it means. But arguably it's something that exists on the edge of the art world. It often blurs the line between activism, performance, community organising, and social research. But really, the way we kind of define it is an art form that involves people. People are a medium, and that's what we need to make it happen. And then kind of just define the edge. For us, I think initially here we're referring to geographical edges, so the rural, coastal, island communities. And sometimes these feel like communities on the edge. The edge may be a boundary, but we as a group view it as something that's central to our situated practices. And the edge can sometimes feel final, but for us it isn't. It's really the spaces in between and a catalyst for all of our work. In these conditions, we think that our role as socially engaged practitioners becomes one of conveners, where working kind of on the boundaries and embracing that way of working, which is really where the magic can happen. And so through the case studies that you'll see here from our own projects, we'll discuss why we think as socially engaged practitioners, this process makes us more open to collaborative ways of working because of living in a geographical edge. So just to give you a little bit of background on myself, as Reggie said, I'm a producer and cultural programmer. I stay in Caithness in the far North Highlands, and I'm co-director of Life Arts Centre. And the Arts Centre itself is about 10 miles away from the famous John Groat, so we definitely operate in what some people would describe as a geographical edge. But I've always been more intrigued with the Norse idea of Caithness as being the very top, the start of something, so not the ending, but rather the beginning. And whatever the geography, this place has really been built for me around interactions and complex encounters with people, and I think that's really what a truly socially engaged practice should facilitate. I think for me this means our work is more about social edges, and so working here in this way has been a process of really shutting up and listening, especially as an incomer. So as practitioners, for us to really move successfully in this landscape, I think we need to be acutely aware of our community, arguably more so than our urban counterparts, but in a way that I think our city-dwelling peers can probably and hopefully learn from. I'm always acutely aware of the need to develop and keep my knowledge of Caithness up to date. And I think it really takes an understanding that this isn't the edge, it's not just somewhere, it really is the centre of people's lives and of people's worlds. And this became really evident during the pandemic. The Caithness community response has been amazing. It's been really praised across Highland Council as a perfect example of mutual aid and a community working really well together. But before coronavirus hit, at the start of 2020, there were 3 local reports which really highlighted the kind of inequalities and quite unique deprivation rural coastal areas like Caithness face. There are lots of positives, but I think it really captures something for us about the inequalities that we face here. and unfortunately many of those inequalities have been worsened during the pandemic. What does that mean? Oh, there's some pictures of me with sheep and WI. What does that mean for us as an arts organisation? Indeed, what does it mean for social practitioners? As the artist Sophie Hope wrote back in April 2020, for a livelihood based on physical social interaction, the current necessary distancing measures have put the principles and incomes of many socially engaged artists under huge strain. And the impact of coronavirus was instant and devastating for the Arts Centre. Like, our entire programme was gone overnight. Many of our funding streams were cut off instantly. But as an organisation, we were quite quickly able to reformat our activity and play an important role in the community response. And I just put a couple of examples of some of the projects we did during the lockdown. So from film and drama to crafts and flower pressing and activity packs to help with homeschooling. And it's really possible to see this kind of work happening across the UK, often from rural arts organisations, but also from the much underappreciated engagement, learning and participation teams in larger institutions as well. So for me, I think this period has really enabled us to engage with local artists in new ways and reach communities we've previously not engaged with before. And whilst this has definitely had its challenges, it's a totally new way of working. It has offered us a real opportunity to step change in an organisation. Which kind of leads me to our latest project, which is CARE, which stands for Caithness Artists in Residence for short. And that's really kind of been a chance for us to bring artists, like the three you'll hear from just now, who are excited to work across these boundaries of practice and process and work with those in our communities who maybe do exist on those social edges. So we know working with older people, younger people, care experience young people, young families, and really working in response to these challenges to see what we can come up with together. And I think, like, for me as a practitioner, it's really asked me to reimagine what an arts organisation for Caithness can be as our community moves forward. How can the organisation work with artists and facilitate creative responses to local problems, encouraging creative cultural activism? Can operating in these edges, almost as like a matchmaker between art and community, working in these crossovers, in these edges, create social space for transformation that will allow us to collectively imagine a better future. So on that theme, I will pass over to Louise. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thanks so much, Charlotte. I'll just wait till I get permission to share my screen. Oh, there we go. So yeah, it's so nice to be here with everyone, and it's just nice to be able to present with my peers and colleagues as well. I'll just play this. Is that okay? Yeah, good. Okay. So just to give you a tiny bit of background, I moved to Fort William about 5 years ago to continue working in the outdoor adventure education sector. Fort William is often referred to as the gateway to the Highlands, and it officially sits as an urban-rural settlement. So this blurred distinction raises its own unique set of issues, of course, but there is an exciting undercurrent of creative practitioners and a sense of connection within the community determined to make the town work for us. I originally studied painting at Edinburgh College of Art, so I've been working towards blending these practices through outdoor walking projects over the last few years. I use walking and socially engaged practice as an artistic methodology to encourage conversations and mutual learning about place, environment and political issues, mostly related to environmental and social themes. So I think my desperation to leave my painting practice behind, I realise now, was a symptom of the solitary and traditional conditions artists are still often expected to work in. I wanted to pursue art and the outdoors, but for a while my circles of community and nature were still very separate and were hard to juggle. To gain legitimate experience in the outdoor industry and to be taken seriously as a practitioner in this field, I had to focus and commit to it as if it was my only passion. But after the best part of a decade, I now have the perspective and knowledge to not only facilitate meaningful experiences in the hills safely, but directly transfer those skills into my creative walking and social practice projects. So learning more about socially engaged art practice through the MA in particular has given me the language to back up my vague desires to rebel against the solitary form of art. And it also gives this work credibility across different sectors, and it offers us as practitioners a focus and a reason to be working across the boundary edges of industries and communities of practice. Often being described as activists, I have questioned this definition in relation to my own work, as it isn't what you might think of as typically activist. But then I wonder about the powerful trickle effects of facilitating conversations, for example, around diversity in the outdoors or land access issues, to specific participants within the community here. Through these deliberate walking, making and engagement projects, we are all, of course, active too. The active movement through physical space for a specific reason also activates a backdrop or scene into a more memorable place. The space transforms into a place of meaning and a new or deeper connection is formed. So just to focus in a little bit on my most recent project, Tree Lines, conducted between September and November 2020, I looked at the issues around our existing and non-existent woodlands in our local environment. How connected we are to such spaces and what we could do to increase our knowledge and spread collective awareness. What is the relationship between the existing and theoretical woodlands of our future, and can we promote pro-environmental behaviours through a socially engaged art project whilst attempting to bridge the apparent gap in how local people engage with the outdoors? Of course, set within the context of COVID-19, this project morphed and shifted to reflect the situation we were in. These themes I was researching previously had become increasingly pertinent during this specific social time. Roles have shifted and changed under our feet constantly this last year, but we have always, luckily, been allowed outside to walk, and mostly allowed to walk with at least one other person from a different household, albeit at a social distance. So for many, this freedom became more than exercise. It was and is a way to cling to one of our most fundamental human needs. When much of modern society is in flux around us, we reach for the ground with our feet and need to understand our place amongst the trees more than ever. As Barry Lopez writes, this is an old business, walking slowly over the land with an appreciation of its immediacy to the senses and in anticipation of what lies hidden in it. So during the first 4 walks of this project, heading into accessible woodland areas close to sea level with a variety of participants, we collected tree notes on A5 paper as a simple way of encouraging a moment to deliberately consider a particular tree in front of us. And then for the next 4 walks, I took these stitched together tree notes up to the theoretical tree line. The tree notes became a collective concertina book of personal moments of human to tree considerations. So these tree notes also pulled out to make a literal line across the roughly 600-metre line on the hillsides where the trees should or could theoretically reach the edge of the woodland. The deliberate act of stopping each time with the second phase of participants to literally create a line in a place that has a name in a textbook yet does not actually exist currently became almost performative and a way to really highlight the what could be. This phase of the project, due to reducing the risk of putting strain on emergency services during this particular time, I opted to approach other competent outdoor professionals and hillgoers, given the terrain we would be walking on. Of course, then, this threw up conversations around accessibility and barriers to the outdoors. Who gets to be in these places, and what barriers have they had to overcome to get here? How can we, as people embedded in this outdoor field, promote open and frank conversations with peers and others about these issues? Can we collectively make a difference in this community where there is a strong adventure focus to engaging with the outdoors? The act of carrying the tree notes from participants who were likely for various reasons not able to be on the tree line halfway up a mountainside became a symbolic act of carrying a snapshot of the views to a relatively inaccessible place. Kester describes the socially engaged way of working as the building of a relationship that unfolds over time, defined by unvisualizable moments of expression. Or in other words, it diffuses that traditional edge or barrier between artist and viewer, and the progress of the artwork happens over time. It is durational and responsive to place, context, and the participants themselves, which the others will talk about more. This project was about activating the imagination across participants' days and walks. It was about the power of sharing anecdotes and personal stories or interesting facts about trees with each other that takes our thought into an imagined world. It was about rooting the imagination in reality too, though, appreciating what we do have in order to understand what we might strive for going forwards. Environmental research shows that the more we care about and value our local environments we have, appreciating what is in front of us, the more likely we are to act in pro-environmental ways that will collectively have positive impacts on the more intangible and global scale issues. Environmentalists, and indeed all of us, need to not only have conversations about what we have lost, as we are beyond the point of rewinding the clock. What actions can we take now to support a sustainable society and environment going forwards? It's about looking forwards, understanding what the cross-disciplinary issues are, and responding together critically and sensitively to promote hope and future action. As socially engaged artists, we need to understand these conceptual edge spaces as real and tangible, how they affect our day-to-day lives, but also to question them, consider imagined edges or non-edges, and foster a sense of fluidity through them, so that we can build up our understanding of each other. And what better place to do this than the places in which we live? So thanks so much for listening, and I'll happily pass you on to the wonderful Fiona. So then go sharing. There we go.
Thanks, Louise.
Yes.
Let me just share my screen. Here we go. Are we seeing that okay? Brilliant. So, as my colleagues have introduced, as I've mentioned before, and as in the case in many rural coastal communities, we're all naturally interdisciplinary and we wear many hats. So here are some of mine. I studied photography at Edinburgh Napier, and I graduated about 6 years ago when I moved back home to the Isle of Lewis, and I started my own business called Dunnachie. And I work with individuals and small businesses to create engaging visuals, often incorporating my mother tongue, Scottish Gaelic. I also work part-time as a heritage development officer with Udaside Gausing, the local community land trust. And the combination of these two jobs is really interesting through the perspective of socially engaged art. Today, as Charlotte and Louise have done before me, I'm going to talk a little bit about my practice, integrating my quite often compartmentalised ways of working as a freelance creative and do community development, not to mention all the various hats of life and interests. I'll also talk a little about what it means to me to work rurally as a socially engaged artist, because I think the two are intimately linked. And as someone who lives and works rurally, it's almost impossible to practice but also be social in one way or another. And to work rurally, especially as a creative, even in the most solitary of practices, I think there's an element of social, even in the broadest sense. There we go. So to reiterate something that Charlotte mentions in her introduction, today we're referring to geographical edges, rural, coastal, islands and communities. And we often are referred to as communities on the edge, in inverted commas. We see the edge as more like a boundary and view it as quite slow or situated practices. I'd like to go one step further here and say one of the work in these areas, communities on the edge, with some an edge, and the centre of our world, people are saying, not just because we might be rural or remote, but because we're surrounded by the things that are important to us. Our lives and our practices are quite literally centred in these communities. Living in one of the most northwesterly islands here in Lewis, I think that, as is often the case in coastal communities, there's a romantic notion attached to the edge, and a romantic notion of what the edge means, it looks like. And we often see people coming from out west to create a project in or to these communities on the edge. And there's often, not always, but often an expectation that they'll be able to come in to the creative project with no connections, no roots, and often drawing on somebody else's network and participants. So what then, as situated, rurally based, socially engaged practitioners, makes us different? We'll pick up on some things that Louise has said before. I think the biggest difference is how social art practice allows us to change our approach to these projects, combining our practices and everyday lives, throwing them together, pulling aspects from the different parts of our lives that we're involved in. And I think this is especially the case when these projects are on our home earth. There's a difference in our sense of place. There's a difference in the connection that we have to these environments and the people in them, and how we choose to utilise these connections. I think we also have a sensitivity, not only to our participants, but to the wider community and its story. This segues nicely to my project Buntiness. Buntiness is incorporated photography and voice recordings, and started in 2016, commissioned by the local community land trust, UHI, who I still work for. It started in my home village of Galton and then expanded to encompass the wider Galton Estate community. And as I look back on it through my socially engaged art goggles, I like to call them, I can see more and more how it was a socially engaged art project without me knowing it was at the time. And I actually think it demonstrates some of the points that we talk about today quite nicely. The foundation of Buntiness is based on conversation, basically, and is complemented or illustrated by photographic portraits, which may seem kind of weird since I'm first and foremost a photographer, but I'll come back to this in a wee while. For most, socially engaged art is less about doing projects on or to participants, but using a more collaborative approach, which sees the participants, for lack of a better word, as equal collaborating parts of this project. In Buntiness, the initial conversations were structured with some key themes that were outlined by the Trust, linked into their strategic plan, but largely these conversations were led and guided by the participant, and this then directed how I photographed them. Each participant then would refer me to another member of the community to go and speak to, and this snowballed until I had spoken to about 30 people in the end. The question we ask ourselves as socially engaged art practitioners then is, what is the story being told, who is telling it, and why, for what purpose? This brings me on to authorship, which I think is another aspect in which social art differs slightly from a more solitary art practice. The community and artists make this project together. It grows more naturally and flexibly with the community. It is both with, about, and for the community. By sharing a sense of the sense of authorship on the project, we're engaging with people of the community and sharing this collaborative collective narrative. It communicates and engages people differently, facilitating conversation between different sectors, as Louise mentioned earlier on. And Amy will talk more about this later on, but I also wanted to mention how this edge or this boundary is the space between, where we as socially engaged creatives act as facilitators in a variety of capacities. And as fellow Islander, Amy, I also love the metaphor you use to describe the space between, but I'll leave that to you to come back to. Social engaged artists are natural facilitators, I would say, because as I alluded to earlier, we combine our interdisciplinary practice with an expansive and eclectic network that surrounds us in our rural communities. I may be a photographer by training, but I'm also a board member, a volunteer, etc., etc. I could go on, but you get the idea. Therefore, in our practices, sitting there in the boundary or no man's land between these various community groups, educational organisations, cultural or heritage groups, we can create a bridge between these imaginary areas, as Louise calls them, seeing creative solutions and developing projects that make meaningful connections and fill these gaps. Finally, and Charlotte mentioned this as well, and so did Louise, but the COVID lockdown, as tough as it was, played a huge part in highlighting to me just how important it is to have these different aspects of my life working coherently alongside each other. I pushed a huge shift in all of us, I expect, not just our creative practitioners, in the way that we work, in the way that we practice. It emphasised the need to look at how we make meaningful engagement, especially in these rural and remote areas. And to me personally, it's reinforced the asset it is to be a creative working at least part-time within a non-creative organisation, and the impact that can have applying those creative skills on other areas of the community. Finally, I'd like to reiterate how ultimately this way of working is an opportunity for more effective, sensitive, collective and collaborative ways of working in the future for ourselves and for the wider communities, and for both us as artists and for any group wishing to work alongside us. Thank you very much. I will finish up and pass on to Amy.
Thanks, Fiona. So I'm just going to keep my video off because my bandwidth has been typically island. A shame as well because I put makeup on. So I am just going to share my screen now and hopefully that works okay. Can everybody see that okay? Yeah, perfect. Okie doke. Hi everyone, it is an absolute pleasure to be a part of this seminar today. Thank you Charlotte, Louise and Fiona for your thoughtful case studies on what has been, what is and what could be. So my name is Amy Dunnachie and I'm an artist and maker based on my home island of Jura on the west coast of Scotland. Jura is bedded deep in my heritage, with my mum, my gran and many mums and grans before them treading the soil and calling this land home. Jura is currently home to just over 200 souls, so in comparison to Fiona's home island of Lewis, it presents quite a different geographical community dynamic. We have a healthy demographic here, and indeed one of the most enriching aspects of life here is the porous borders between age groups. And what I mean by that is living closely among children, the elderly and everyone in between. Whether you're 9, 19 or 90, you are a valuable part of any conversation here. Islanders are creative by nature, and I don't necessarily mean that they are all painters or actors, but as Fiona nodded to with the hats that she wears in her community, and referring to my juggling self-portrait illustration, we have learned how to balance many roles, interests and challenges on a tightrope. Island life makes demands of you. You're automatically engaged in a collaboration. So I trained as a jeweller and silversmith at Glasgow School of Art, and since graduating nearly 6 years ago, I have been involved in a variety of community projects on Jura, working alongside the Jura Development Trust to research, initiate and deliver these. My practice is very much concerned with the collection of stories about our environment in order to celebrate our own unique understandings of place and ourselves within those places. I use found objects to bring in the concept of a past life, whilst also doing my bit to keep our shorelines clean in the developing present. In a nutshell, I want to use the resourcefulness I have earned as an islander to help people feel hopeful and uplifted. I no longer see my making practice as existing separately from my people practice. They are codependent. As Matarazzo writes in A Restless Art, participatory art thrives in liminal space, on margins and borders, and it demands that we think, feel, talk and share in new ways with other people. As an islander, the sea plays an important role in our lives. Visually, it is always there, an energetic reminder of our geographic community membership. Laterally, it is being looked upon as a protective boundary line as well as a lifeline. It is the support system in which essential resources travel on, and we are more aware of it now with the global pandemic than we have ever been in my lifetime. I am interested in the idea that the very feature that gives us the literal and figurative definition of being on the edge is very much a dynamic structure in itself. Much like the veins in our bodies, these edges carry life-giving material, ensuring the survival of the whole. I wonder if anyone here has been watching the recent David Attenborough documentary, A Perfect Planet. The most recent episode covered oceans and the importance of the currents in supporting the climate, as well as carrying nutrients and reproductive cells to new places. I couldn't help but think that this was a fitting analogy of what I see as the mechanics of socially engaged art. The mechanics being sharing and exchanging and being connected, a social survival kit. So this is a good point to give a bit of an overview of the project An Eye for an Eye, which grew out of the UK-wide lockdown in April. The project used reciprocity as a way of cultivating meaningful bonds during a time of stagnation and through an exchange of makes. Curiosity was the bedrock of the project, and like Charlotte mentioned earlier, presented an opportunity for participants to listen and observe what was going on in their own environment. So, starting with found objects that, incidentally, were brought in from the sea on ocean currents, I made mark makers, stampers, scrapers, smudgers, splashers, dabbers, and brushes. Your imagination is the limit for the function of these tools. These were then posted out to willing creative practitioner participators located in various parts of the UK to make something with. I asked each participant to consider their own state of isolation and question the potential to feel more connected in a shared sense of isolation. This might be a bit of a nostalgic tangent, but my own memories of being a teenager on Jura feed right into this concept. When the sea currents actually prevented safe passage and the ferries were all cancelled, as teenage Jurors couldn't get to high school on the neighbouring Isle of Islay. The joy of not having to make the long journey to sit in stuffy classrooms resulted in spending the day with each other playing football in a soggy field in a force 10 gale. Technically speaking, we were isolated, but in no way did we feel it. Our resource of connection was each other. I then asked the participants from An Eye for an Eye to post back their makes for me to exhibit in the outdoor locations that the found objects were discovered. These were in places that the residents of Jura could stumble upon on their daily walking route, a slight interruption to the landscape in the form of new perspectives from other locations in the UK. Each round of 6 artists was displayed for 2 weeks in weatherproof boxes, where residents could also access material online through a QR code on each box and leave comments if they wished. So what did we learn from An Eye for an Eye? Each artist, most being on the Art and Social Practice MA programme with UHI, reported that the project helped them to feel more connected to their own environments, to Jura as a central point, to me and to each other. And remember, this MA is delivered entirely online, so we only experience each other in 2D form. Participants also became reflective about their own position as a practitioner as a result of working with materials that have been repurposed. The mark makers became a symbol for working with what we have and activating or awakening creativity in each of us. The physical nature of the posting and making was integral to the connection process, what with the sudden surge of online working and communicating. Participants felt happier, more hopeful and less lonely. The residents of Jura also enjoyed the process of finding the exhibition boxes. It was a physical and rewarding task. On the other hand, one of the residents who gave me feedback, who is also a runner, noted that it helped him to slow down, look closer and pay attention to the environment around him, which was full of life. I consider that the practice of exchange keeps circulating like our ocean currents, and as long as you look after it and pay attention and stay curious about your edges, exchange fills the space between isolation and connection in a generative process of healing, like connective tissue knitting together to form a bond unique to each one of us. Claire Anderson, a writer of behavioural research, talks about being an opportunity maker in the quest to be more deeply connected. And I think that there's something in that description that really captures the essence, for me, of the ultimate goal of social art practice. She says, "Opportunity makers are not affronted by differences, they are fascinated by them. And if we are not fascinated by the context in which we live, work and dream, are we on any kind of edge at all?" So thank you very much. I'm just going to put the next slide on, which is our contact details, and I will leave that up there for you to see while Charlotte gives us a summary of the seminar so far. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Amy, and thanks, Fiona and Louise as well. So just to wrap up, I think if everyone saw Amy's last slide, I think that kind of perfectly sums up the role of the social practitioner in rural and coastal communities. It's one of that deep intersectional engagement, existing in the edges, acting as a convener of the in-between spaces. I think all three of you talked about our environment, our place in that and our sensitivity to that, and about perceived edges, in fact, being the centre of things. I think we've had three different approaches presented here, but we all three had similar themes around hope, sharing, resourcefulness, and imagination. I think many of the ideas presented, and particularly by Fiona, actually raised the point about working with, not to or on our communities. And I think that kind of speaks possibly to some of the more ethical dilemmas many social practitioners working in whatever field have been grappling with, particularly in the wake of conversations around decolonising this type of work and not using social art to replace or art wash social welfare. But I do think that my colleagues here have really made the case for arts and culture and creativity in rural development, indeed highlighting its role in a post-COVID recovery, but particularly for socially engaged practice and how valuable this work can be for rural communities. Like Louise mentioned, I think the case studies here have really highlighted the difference between the image of this kind of lone solitary artist and how Louise, Fiona and Amy work in complete opposite to that. I think that also maybe comments on how the traditional art world might view rural spaces, and that my colleagues' work provides a counterpoint of difference to how people in the traditional art world might consume and capitalise on the rural. So basically, I think what we're trying to do is encourage you all to explore your edges and weave them all together. That's where the most interesting finds are to be made. And at a time when we're all isolated in these lockdown situations, reach out to your boundaries. I think, like Amy highlighted, maybe edges are the product of being curious about the spaces you find yourself in and the circumstances and challenges that you find there. So explore them. I'll post our references up in the chat there. And a big thank you to Joe and Raggy for hosting us. And we'll look forward to some questions, I think.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, Amy, Louise and Fiona. That was absolutely fabulous. Wonderful. I've seen so many positive comments running alongside here in the chat as you've been talking. People are just loving it and what you have to say and the beautiful images as well. Yes, I think what struck me the most was that you're continuing a conversation that we were already having in this seminar series, but you're seeing it from an arts point of view. But I remember in Kate McCulloch's seminar a couple of months back, we were talking about creating with and researching with and discovering with, and I think that's so important that you were saying about art previously being viewed as a solitary practice, where you have this one genius who's supposed to produce from his studio kind of thing. And it's been kind of like that in academia and in research as well. Whereas now, in recent times, we're kind of waking up to co-creation, co-research, co-discovery. And this talk has really highlighted that for me from the art world as well. Fantastic. We'll take some of the questions that have come up in the chat. First, there was a little plug from yes, Nikki Rust. If you scroll up the chat, Nikki Rust says, we're recruiting for an interpretation officer at the moment. And there's a link there if you're interested in applying for this job, deadline Sunday. Also, we're looking for expressions of interest from artists, creatives and arts curators and project managers to oversee and co-produce socially engaged art in the North Pennines and Yorkshire Dales. So there are 2 links that people can follow. Okay, going back to the questions. Now we can start with a question from Kate McCulloch, who says, really enjoying your presentations, thank you. Would you share more about the people who you find are edged out of place, finding aspects of places and experiences hard to reach, and how you might approach the tensions of being someone exploring how to engage and support access for all? How can practitioners avoid the role of being the only route of access, or even the mediator of the idea that access to the places and experiences we have identified is the point of project, obscuring the idea that it might be ourselves who are peripheral? But a complex question. Who wants to take that?
I don't mind giving it a go, because I was reading it earlier, and so I've had a bit of time to ponder it. I might not be able to answer it all, though, because it is quite a complex question. I was thinking in relation to my projects and my experience moving to Fort William, is I've sensed that there is this apparent separation between people who go out for adventures into the outdoors and people who don't. And I think as a sort of outdoor capital of the UK, as it's branded, it can be really intimidating to feel like you belong in the hills, like just going for a stroll. And I think I see my projects as just not to solve that problem necessarily on my own. I think it takes a lot of different people in a lot of different fields to do that. But I just want to be able to offer one alternative route into experiencing something in the outdoors from a different perspective. And yeah, I think it's really important that we're not proclaiming to be the only or the best way of doing things. It is just about offering an alternative to what exists, so that it's great. It's fine, like these industries exist already and they're absolutely amazing and they're great for the local communities, but they can also be intimidating if you're not quite in that field, or even I've been in that field and I'm still intimidated. So yeah, I think it's about offering the opportunity that if people want to come in and try something new in a safe environment. As well, I think it's about using appropriate language, because people, like, I think the arts as well can be really intimidating. So if you promote the fact that you've got this art project, like, I think you have to be careful about who it is that you want to engage with, and using appropriate language. And just, it might just be as simple as literally placing yourself, I don't know, like becoming a volunteer, and maybe over time, maybe developing a project with the people that you get to know. It's not about sitting in your house and thinking up a project and then asking, oh, who wants to join in? So I think it's just about slowly sort of embedding yourself into different aspects in the community to work out how it might be best to approach different projects. And you go, Fiona.
I think that's really good advice, Louise. I wonder if any of the other panelists would like to comment as well.
Yeah, I'd just like to jump in there. I think I totally agree with everything Louise just said. But just to build on that, I think we all mentioned it at some points in our presentations, but that collaborative approach, working with other sectors, with other organisations. I know from personal experience, I work alongside and with the local community land trust here. And having a long-term relationship with an organisation like this, which is already embedded in a community, is a huge asset. And they're already, within their strategic aims, they're already looking to engage with those edged out communities, these edged out people. So you're going in there and building on something that's already been established and just coming at it from a fresh perspective. So yeah, I think I've seen it in the chat a lot. There's lots of opportunities, I think, for people to be more open-minded and artists working alongside scientists, or alongside environmental, opportunities for lots of different sectors to work together within that creative sector that don't necessarily think, oh, an artist could do this for us, you know. So yeah, I'll stop there before I go on too much.
This chimes to with what Nikki Ross had commented in the chat. It says who are less likely to participate in socially engaged rural art and what the barriers to participation are and how to overcome them.
I could maybe have a hear at that. I think it definitely relates to the earlier question, and particularly from my perspective, coming from an arts organisation where we think about that about these barriers to participation a lot. I think for us, we've really been thinking about, I guess, like about outreach as a term even, and that always kind of privileges our position and that we're taking work out to people. And actually, I think we're maybe starting to look at it as a kind of in reach. But I think this idea of like meet people where they are, or you know, this idea of kind of dig where you stand and encourage people to do that and communities to do that, and how empowering that can be for people. And that it's not a case of like taking what we have out, but seeing what is already existing, what are the interests, and again that kind of co-design process that Fiona spoke about, and kind of not seeing anything as a barrier because we're opportunists, and we'll always kind of take the chance to play with that. I think. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you so much, Charlotte. I've got a question here too about the edges kind of within your way of working. So the question goes, I'm interested in your perspective on whether that socially engaged art practice should be seen as on the edge of mainstream or non-participatory or socially engaged art, or after what we're learning from the pandemic, should socially engaged participatory art be seen as core of art and artists?
I can jump in. I think we see it definitely as the core. It's at the core of our practice. That's what I was saying. It's the centre for us, is the edge for other people. So the edges within our practices, we kind of, throughout this course, we've kind of come to terms with this concept of communities of practice, which I think ties in exactly what you're thinking. Communities of practice is that drawing together of different parts of our lives, the different parts of the world that we're involved in, and pulling them together into a seeing the big picture, and actually seeing the edges are not really as being edges, but as just, you know, as Amy says, as boundaries, as a place between two places where there's opportunities. I don't know if that answers the question, but I hope it does.
Yeah, I think you speak to that a little bit, Fiona. Oh, go on, Louise, do you want to go?
Yeah, I was just going to say it's yeah, and when Fiona was talking about that, it's quite like exciting to see it as an edge space, because I think, like we've all kind of described in our own ways, that's where the exciting things happen, or when you can blur the edges between different things, and that's where the creative thought starts coming, or you start shifting your perception or whatever it might be. But that being said, it would be really nice if it was taken more seriously in the art world and considered more central. But I wonder if the very fact that it is on the edge makes it even more exciting. So I don't know, it'd be interesting to see what will happen in the next 20 years or so, see how people sort of keep pushing this line of artwork. But that's all I was going to say. On you go, Charlotte.
I think you said everything, Louise. But I always remember, so one of our care artists is George Gunn, who I think might be here today. But I remember when I told him I was doing this MA, and George is a poet and playwright and a fantastic wordsmith, and his instant response was, well, all art is social, which is great. And maybe I would reply to him, all good art is social. Maybe that's what we need to think about for the future.
It strikes me too, by listening to you, that art is research, or the way you do it, art is research. And we have a question here from Carl Johnson asking, are you seeing your local socially engaged art lead to social change locally?
I'll jump in there. I suppose it depends how you see what actual activities you see as the socially engaged art. So in my community, I worked with the Development Trust, and I very much, my role as it was described on a piece of paper didn't have art written anywhere in it at all. And very much what part of my role was doing was bringing communities together and enabling opportunities, basically, doing the paperwork. And I mean, I'm not particularly excited by paperwork, but the art in those situations was bringing people together, giving a platform for conversation, and letting them do it. It's not about what I do. It's not about me sort of doing the conversation to the people. It's enabling a space for the people to come together and have that conversation, and that's where the action is. So again, it comes back to Fiona's bit about authorship in her presentation. So when people feel supported and encouraged to have those conversations, then they make the change themselves. And I don't know if that answers the question, but I felt kind of like I wanted to say that.
Yes, I think a lot of people in the chat here have started discussing among themselves alongside your discussion here. So it feels like we're all having a big dialogue. I hope you can read the chat here, or if you can't now, that you can come back to it after the end. So we have from Louise here, I wanted to highlight a new community-led funding scheme. So there's a link there that people can go to if they're interested. And then he says, I was thinking more around elitism in the arts and institutions and funding, and often the differentiation between performance, excellence, and communities. When I definitely agree, community arts can be excellent. I think that's more of a comment than a question, but it's people taking part in the dialogue that you're having now. And then Virginia Hutchinson says, I personally have conflicting issues with the term socially engaged artists, just as I have a problem with the term public art. Does anybody want to comment on that?
I mean, I have lots of issues with art in general and the outdoors, and yeah, I'm doing them both, but there we go. Yeah, I think it's really important to always be aware of these things, because especially socially engaged art, given that it's relatively new, there is quite a substantial amount of writing about it now, but by no means like anything compared with any other type of art. So, and it's loads of different types of names are given to it as well. So I think we just need to go with the flow with these things, and hopefully we'll not just get stuck in a rut just because we're calling it socially engaged art right now. Maybe in a couple of years we'll learn more and call it something else.
I wonder if there's something in there about socially engaged art. Is it socially engaged art if you're not curious about the term socially engaged art and keep trying to pick it apart and make it your own, and then change your mind next week and make it something else, than a completely evolving thing?
I think that's the joy that we found in the last 2 years. I think my colleagues and I see there's some more course mates on the participant list here as well who will agree with us that what we thought socially engaged art was 2 years ago is completely different to how we perceive it now. And that's part of the joy of being involved in socially engaged art, is that it's an ever growing and changing and evolving, and you can make it as personal or as subjective as you want, because it's how you interpret socially engaged art, I think, and that's like Louise said, it's new and there's a wee bit of writing on it now, but it's really, you know, by doing and by exploring these concepts and having the language to talk about what socially engaged art is and how it engages and what it means to different people. That's kind of how I'm coming to terms with calling myself a socially engaged artist.
I know we're running out of time, but I just want to make the point that you don't have to be an extrovert to do this type of work either. Like, we're not all like, yeah, we love people. Like, obviously, people are great, but I do think that very often I have introvert traits, but it's just about sort of pushing yourself to have those moments of exchange and valuing other people's opinions and views. But
that's good news, Louise. We'll announce the winners of the photo competition soon, but Matt was having some trouble connecting in, so we have a couple of more minutes where we can continue our discussion until Matt manages to get in. I also wanted to add on to what you just said there, Louise, about introverts. Lots of people have commented in the chat that it's wonderful how your work has shown that even in the COVID pandemic, when we're all feeling quite isolated, there are still ways of connecting, and that you're leading a route towards a connected future in what you're doing. I hope you get a chance to see all those comments as well. Okay, so while we're waiting for Matt to connect there, I was just wondering if I could get back to Fiona, and can you tell me a little bit about how you use Gaelic in your work?
That's a big question, because that's like asking an English speaker how you include English in your work. I think the two, I didn't speak English till I went to school, so the two for me are completely mishmashed in my brain. But to simplify it, I guess I see it as an opportunity, because there's plenty of graphic designers around, but not many that are also Gaelic speakers. So I work a lot with the local publishing company because they need people who speak and understand Gaelic to do text layouts, and I work with local businesses to include Gaelic within their branding and within their publicity and marketing. But even in the most simplest sense as well, like I know I've had families that have come to me because they know that I'll speak Gaelic to their children during a photo shoot, so it's that kind of conversational accessibility, I guess. Here it's the norm. A lot of people do speak Gaelic. I think over 50 or 60% of our population in Lewis speak Gaelic still quite fluently at home. So yeah, to me it's just the norm, but yeah, I think that's a simple enough explanation. I hope I answered your question, Raggy.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I just love to hear about this kind of thing, because there's no Gaelic here in Orkney, but I'm very interested in it. So yeah, thank you so much. Okay, I can see Matt has connected now, so I'm afraid we'll have to end the discussion session here. And I would like to say a huge thank you to all the panelists. It's been a wonderful and fascinating seminar today. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, and best wishes for your continued work.
so much.
There's like no facilities for applause online. I'll just have to do all the applauding myself. Here we go. Thank you so much.
I'll do a blanket thank you. I'll blanket thank you from all of us as well. Thank you for having us. It feels very professional and official to be presenting out with of uni, so thank you.
You did really well. Okay, Matt, the photo competition.
Hi there. Yes, unfortunately, I had to come in an odd way, so I'm still trying to figure out how to share my PowerPoint with the images. If you could give me some advice, that would be good. The share button down the bottom of my screen is greyed out, so I don't seem to have that facility.
You might have to be upgraded to host or...
Matt, you have been made a presenter, so you should see that. If you don't see it there, you might see it under File. So if you go to File, you can maybe do Open and Share.
Thank you. It's a spinning wheel of death now. Okay, that's curious. Yeah, I've got the file ready to be presented, but it doesn't seem to be there. But I'll find it in a second.
I can assure everyone that the images are worth waiting for, having had a sneak peek myself.
is anybody seeing anything happening?
No, I can remove presenter privileges and then put them back to you, which might help.
Well, it seems to be loading a file.
I can see a white screen with the Edge photography competition on it.
Already? Really? Oh, that's great. I can't see that.
Our internet in Lewis is superior, obviously.
Everything gets to Lewis first. The centre of the universe.
It's about 70% loaded here now. Unfortunately, I didn't think I could send it to anyone, so the images are as the files came in, so they're very big. And here we are. I've got it on my screen now. That's great. Okay, can I just confirm, Fiona? I can see you. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that? Fabulous. Well, thank you very much. That was a wonderful presentation. I really, really enjoyed it. It was intellectually stimulating. The images were great, and the discussion afterwards was fantastic. So thank you very much to all the presenters. It's a real privilege to be bunged on the end of something so good. My role up to fairly recently was one of the co-chairs of the Silk Research Cluster at the UHI, but I've now retired, so I've given that position up. But myself and my colleague Lindsay Blair were tasked with judging the photography competition, which really was designed to try to stimulate interest in the Silk and Hark research clusters to raise awareness. So the photography competition was put out on the theme of the Edge, which really is focused on the research theme that both the research clusters are engaged with. Now, I'm now trying to change slide. I found the button. That's good. Excellent. There were 4 categories: weather, jagged edge, life and death on the edge, and the edge's visionary place. And you can tell I've been a lecturer for many, many years because I'm reading the PowerPoint that you can see quite easily in front of you. The great traditions of education. So what I'm going to do very, very quickly is move through each of these categories, beginning with commended, going through 3rd, 2nd and 1st places. I'll give you a few seconds, sort of 5 or 10 seconds to look at the photographs so that you can appreciate them and see them. Okay, here we go. So the 1st category, the Edge weather. The 1st image is by Blanche Haddo, who I believe is here because I saw the name appearing in the list earlier on in one of the chat things, and this is a commended. Fiona, can you just give me the thumbs up to give me confidence that this is actually broadcasting? Thank you very much, that's great. Also commended was Siobhan Cook, Above and Below in Scapa Flow. We were very interested in this image because it's unusual to have a seascape taken from in the sea. So we appreciated the way in which the seascape was working with the sky here. We appreciated that more holistic look at the word weather, or the idea of weather. We were very interested not simply in technical photography, but in ideas people had and the way in which people were expressing their ideas, which were stimulated by the concepts. So technical skills were not really the only thing we were interested in, fundamentally interested in the vision of the photographer. 3rd place in this category is Evelyn Donaldson with Kirkbrek. Often we see photographs of the Highlands Islands which focus on the west coast and the ruggedness, and we were particularly captured by this still and very large landscape. Yolanda Bruce is in 2nd place with Armageddon, and the drama of the sky and the way in which the sky is tumbling towards the landscape we found to be very impressive. We were also interested to know at some point, perhaps from Yolanda, as to how the sky was taken. It's a very, very interesting and intriguing skyscape. And 1st place is to Sarah Ashcroft. One of the interesting things we found about this was the way in which modernity is foregrounded in the image. Weather is not something that's, weather is something that often requires a context. That context of the rural is often there with the wild landscape, but we really enjoyed the way in which these themes of modernity, power, technology, the way in which the railings are constructed was juxtaposed against the weather. On the theme of jagged edge, third place goes to Sue Whittingham with Rusty Stake being is it Fay? I'm not quite sure about the pronunciation there, in Hoy. And we enjoyed, again, this juxtaposition of modernity in two different ways. The Rusty Stake, of course, is technology, but in the background we have this communications facility, this communications tower. But the Rusty Stake, foregrounded, we thoroughly enjoyed looking at. I'm not quite sure who MN is, unfortunately. The file name just came like that, so hopefully MN will announce themselves. Landscapes are messy places. They're often portrayed as beautiful and, as I said, sublime in grandeur and space. But landscapes are also messy, and we really engaged with this very interesting way in which the landscape is crumbling, the landscape is constantly changing and moving. So we thoroughly... Oh, Michael Nesbitt is coming in from Joanna. Thank you, Michael. Excellent. So we really enjoyed not only the colour and the kind of russets and reds in here, but also this way in which the landscape is dynamic. First place is to Yolanda Bruce with Approaching Storm. And here we have the storm in the background. Again, this idea of somehow modernity being encapsulated here as well, but also the way in which the weather overcomes this, the jaggedness of the window frame. Oh, I've just heard that from Rebecca Marr that there's a particular cloud formation in Yolanda's photograph. I wasn't aware of that. Life and death on the edge. This was very intriguing and very interesting, and many photographers explored this in many different ways. And Susan Dyke produced an interesting juxtaposition between the living lichen and the dead rock, but there are also marks which are made on the rock indicating human presence as well. So there's a fascinating layering of activity and layering of things here. And of course, over geological time, rock is fluid and moves. So the whole kind of idea, Frank Rennie could probably give us a discussion on this later on. But here we have the living, the images constructed around the living lichen and the dead rock. Second place goes to Julian Grant with Dying Guillemot, a rather challenging image. And Yolanda Bruce featured heavily in our thoughts. And first place in this, Through the Kitchen Window. We enjoyed this image. It is resonant of documentary photography by people like Tom Kidd, Glenn Slattery, where the working landscape is there. And I'm not sure, there's something happened to the Guillemot shot. Did you see that? No. Okay. It's on my screen just now. Can you see it? Ah, right. Was that missing before? No. Okay. Someone came in with a question mark. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't actually know the answer to that one, Rebecca. So Through the Kitchen Window, this documentary you shot of the sheep moving along here. So although not something that we would find particularly obvious on life and death, of course, this is about the way in which agriculture happens, the way in which farming practices happen, the way in which communities are engaged with these practices. And we also enjoyed this black and white social documentary take. Edge is a visionary place. Susan Dyke is once again in the dispatches with Snow Road, Brodgar Sunrise. Faye Godwin has structured some images very similarly, but usually focused on more grand landscapes on the west coast, whereas the simple landscape, the structure of this, we found to be very, in fact, Kate McCullough used the word very evocative. Third place is to Katrina Port, and I have no idea how to pronounce this. I'm normally really good in my hills because I'm a hill walker, but we'll have to just go with the spelling just now, so I'm not going to embarrass myself. Yes, having people in the photographs is interesting. Celia, is it delusion or delusion? I'm not very sure. Looking back in second place. Well done, Celia. This is interesting because, looking back, the title and the way in which it's a photograph of the starry sky, and there's a wee satellite dish involved there, but there's also the house, the layering of these activities, and the layering of time and sense of this magnificent sense of sublime, that the stars are in the past already by the time the light arrives at us. So we enjoyed the way in which this was playing with the concept fully. And Evelyn Donaldson, Kirkwall Bay, came in first. A very, very calm, serene image. And as a black and white medium format photographer, I enjoy the square image. So I hope, I'm not sure if Fiona's a square photographer. I know that I saw you a few days ago, you posting that black and white wasn't your forte, but hopefully the square is. So we have a reprise of the first place winners was Sarah Ashcroft, Yolanda coming in twice with the Jagged Edge and Life and Death on the Edge, and the Edge's Visionary Place. And I believe, Joe, that these images are going to be seen at the conference, is that correct?
I will be putting them on Twitter this afternoon and also on the website, so follow social media for all the images, and we're not quite sure yet what the format of the conference is going to be, so we can't make that decision yet, but we hope to put them out there. Yes.
There we are. I seem to have successfully closed it down as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Matt. And we have a message here from Julian Grant about the Guillemot photo. It was actually the product of a socially engaged art project. It was taken using an instant film camera by a participant in my PhD research project, reflecting on the living landscapes of people dwelling around the route of the North Coast 500, slightly bending the rules of the contest, but Patrick said he'd let it slide. That's very fitting for today. Well, thank you so much, everyone. This has been absolutely wonderful. So a huge thank you to all the panelists again, and to Matt for sharing the photos with us, and to all the winners and runners up in the photo competition.